said yes.
Well,
Every
100% yes.
single voter said yes, they should be held accountable.
All right, so our poll will stay up until tomorrow morning. I'll give you the results at 6:45.
Recording in progress.
But let's welcome our guest online on Zoom, and for those joining us on YouTube, good morning, and of course, Professor Ramesh Deosaran. Good morning to you, sir. How are you?
Good morning to you, Mr. Richards and Mr. Khan, and your viewers, listeners.
Yeah, Wendell, Stephen, Richard Ragoobarsingh he's hovering somewhere.
Morning,
The alien.
Professor Deosaran. Professor Deosaran, whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because you look a lot younger than when you were in office. So whatever you're doing, keep doing it, like retirement working for you.
That's a lot of work. Thank you. Thank you very
so much for joining us on the Power Breakfast Show on Power 102 Digital.
All right. Paul, your mic is muted.
Paul, your mic muted, yeah.
I know he's talking, but his mic is muted.
I miss going through your library, Professor.
Oh, you were there once, remember?
Yes.
I took you at the back to see the list of books on the shelves.
He has an amazing library. Morning, Prof. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Morning, Paul. Morning.
We are going through quite a time in Trinidad and Tobago. You've written extensively. You've been involved in the Police Service Commission. You were an independent senator. You are a globally recognized criminologist. You have explored the education system in Trinidad and Tobago through many publications and the underbelly to crime. Are we going backward or forward, given what we're seeing in terms of the judicial system and law in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, it is very unfortunate for a country like Trinidad and Tobago, when in 1962 we had such high aspirations economically, socially, and politically, educationally for this country. It is very unfortunate, as you imply, that we are in this situation where it's one crisis after another. And the death of Manny, that 2-year-old, has aroused our concern and grief once again. But you are quite right. This thing is happening too often, and we have to consider whether, first of all, those in charge of the country who have been properly put there, freely and fairly, I would assume, really are up to the job to protect the public, to ensure public safety, because the question you ask is the fundamental one. Are we moving forward, backward, or are we just standing still and going around in circles with a lot of oral presentations, promises, concerns, mutual blaming, and we have had this situation before. So if we do talk about what happened yesterday with Manny and the unfortunate tragic incident, we have had this experience with Andrea Barrett, Sean Luke. There were candlelight processions, tempers were aroused. And we keep doing the same thing all the time, which indicate that we are not moving forward at all. And it is not something to just be distracted by or let it pass by. We have to grip the situation and call those who are supposed to do better, to be responsible and to be accountable. But the unfortunate part of this whole scenario is that there is a large gap, as you have mentioned many times in the Senate. I have listened to you in the Senate, and I don't know what more you can do. The unfortunate gap that keeps recurring is the lack of responsibility by those in charge. And deepening that is the lack of accountability, because Parliament, and I want to be fair, some of you all do try, but Parliament is barely a rubber stamp because of the majority rule by the executive. So I don't want to stretch the issues too far, but we have to look at whether we have the correct political architecture to deal with this thing, because too many people escape through the leaks. Not only those who commit crime, the policymakers escape unscathed, and they come back again to say the same thing they have said last year with big headlines. And so we are at a standstill, as you imply, we're going backwards. And this should not happen. Since 1962, it has been happening. You would have traced the incidents of crime, political corruption, the failure and collapse of the regional corporations, the Health Institute, the Educational Institute. So if this year, if today, Wednesday, the 11th of May, 2022, we could inspire some change from the ground up, right up through Parliament, through civic society, perhaps that might help. Because
how much of the turmoil in the police service in the last year or two is impacting what we're seeing now with crime? Or is it impacting what we're seeing on crime?
Paul, can I add to that question? Because I was going that direction. Because Professor Deosaran is a long-standing former chairman of the Police Service Commission. Do you think, and we had polled this the other day, do you think an appointment of a commissioner of police at this point in time will make a difference?
Right away, it will not make a big difference because the organizational requirements in the police service, apart from the complexity of crime itself, you have to build an organization that to be effective and efficient and accountable doesn't appear overnight. And that is what has been happening to this police service. I have said a healthy democracy depends not so much on the generosity of government, but on the vigilance and vitality of its citizens. And the people have not been calling upon the police service executive, the Minister of National Security, to do what they should have been doing years ago. Hines is taking a lot of blame. The heavy hand of responsibility is falling on Acting Commissioner Jacobs. But the crime, with its sociological causes, these crimes the growth of the crimes and the perpetrators, the habits that they have developed, the attitudes. These things didn't start yesterday, neither did the police service problems. The corruption inside the police service didn't start yesterday because a culture was created whereby you did things wrongly and you were not corrected. They were partners. There were groups that aligned to one another when they warn the drug dealers, well, the raid is coming. All these corrupt activities have been allowed to fall by the wayside because of a lack of structural interventions inside the police service. And that has to stop. The commissioner acting or not, he has to go more deeply, the police complaints authority. They have had, for example, this is a very good example, it's contemporary. They have passed certain files to the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecution, for further evidence gathering, and of course, prosecution. But the DPP office is halfway staffed. He has been pleading for staff to manage his job, to prosecute. And before the prosecution, you have, as Mr. Jacob admitted, in terms of murder, about 20% detection rate. So when you look at the concrete facts, you realize the structural conditions under which this organization, the police service, exists, it is virtually in collapse. And by coming every morning and talking hope, with giving hope to the people, we cannot live by hope alone.
But there's a conference,
Professor. We need some result, and the data is staring us in the face that we need to do much more, Paul, and don't stand still or go backwards, because it will affect all of us, rich, poor, UNCP, and everybody.
There's a conference of 3 scenarios here that I hope you can disaggregate for us. The judiciary is one thing, and the backlog. So let's leave that aside for now. Let's look at the 2 input sides of crime. One, social breakdown, which you've written about extensively, including an inadequate education system, one unequal education system that is creating a dichotomy of performers and underperformers, and a supplied side to possible gang. And 2, the issue of white-collar crime, which is not dealt with effectively in Trinidad and Tobago, and the connection to drug transshipment, gun running, and the big boys, as they say, not being held accountable. So it's easy to hold the boys in the street, and this is a theory I have, the little black boys in the street, but we're not effectively dealing with the white-collar criminals who are funding and running the transshipment and the guns, and how you see that confluence.
Quite relevant, and it's connected because the crimes at the top do have a connection to the crimes below street crimes. The drug trade, for example, and gang activity, they have implication from top to bottom because they have to be financed at the top. And to get that finance, sometimes they have to go to ground level and have home invasions and so on. I remember Mr. Manning stood up in Parliament when he was Prime Minister. And we are talking about the same issues that you were discussing this morning, Paul. And he said, well, there's Mr. Big. There's Mr. Big. And there was some inference about a boat in the Gulf of Paria instigating the drug trade by transportation from Latin America to Trinidad. So where's Mr. Big?
But
As
you're
you were
saying that,
asking.
and Mrs. Karen Eunice raised that issue 2 weeks ago, and the kind of pushback and licks she got for it is astounding. Why aren't we willing to accept that? That we have big players who seem untouchable?
Paul, you're entering into the politics of crime and national security. And that is where we still standing still. Because we have two major parties here. And if you notice what's happening, when one accuses the other one of something, this other one replied by accusing the first one of the same thing. And the public sits now, the ethnic base of one remains comfortable with even the wrong things their party is doing. And similarly on the side, the ethnic base remains deaf and dumb to the wrong things their party is doing. And that's a big, serious challenge this country has. That is the role of party politics in not only fomenting the issues we're talking about, in sustaining the irregularities, because they have a base that will be assured of and not being removed from office on the issues. And that is a troubling, very troubling feat here. What is the responsibility now? Is that only for the public to see something and say something and make a report to the police station? That is all right. But democracy requires members of a particular party to correct their party from inside and move out the leadership if they are found to be inefficient and ineffective. But you're not having that kind of party democracy in this country. You have a lot of favoritism, protection, seeing wrong and saying nothing. We can't continue so. The reform we're looking for, even in terms of what we're talking about, parliament and so on, it has to also start from inside the parties. But party members cannot see wrongdoing by their party leadership and stay silent. Otherwise, we'll go, before you talk about constitutional reform, you have to have political party reform from inside. That is how democracy is supposed to work. Otherwise, everything else will be cosmetic, superficial.
Is that a fair comment, Professor Deosaran? Because most of the times, I think in almost all the instances when we had change of government is because people within the party spoke out against the party leadership at the time. In Mr. Manning's case, it happened. In Basil Pandey's case, it happened. Certainly in Kamala Prasad Bissessa's case, it happened. And even in A.N.R. Robinson, it was people who were in leadership positions, senior men, who spoke out against the type of leadership that they were being subjected to.
Good point, and it's something to reflect on. But you see, they removed them for different reasons. The financiers got displeased. You can't leave that out. And in the case of Robinson, as you know, if you're talking about the NAR, there was a different architecture with Bastille Pandey leaving. But you make a good point, because in Kamala Prasad Bissessa's case and the removal of Pandey, you're right, it was the upsurge of the party membership itself that did it.
Yeah.
After that, what happened? Is there time now for another upsurge in the same UNC? Is it Dr. Rowley moved out Manning? On what issue? It wasn't only Udicott issue. Even though Mr. Rowley complained about Udicott in Parliament and there was a big blast between himself and Mr. Manning. What about all the corruption and the allegations we're facing now? Except that nothing happened with Unicott, even after the complaint was made. So it's settled down now again. And maybe you're right, another upsurge is deserving. It has happened before. I think you're right. It's something to reflect upon. But I would like to see a stronger force from within the party, the delegate system, move your motion, correct the minister. You have a minister now, he resigned, Minister of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries. He said he has to go to Canada. He was in a hurry, he left. Next week, he's back on a post with equal perks as he had before. And the Prime Minister gave a long speech about how good he is and how valuable he is to the party. But why did he leave? We still don't know why. The members of the party should ask why, not only the media and the editorials. Why this happened? Because this tells you how the political architecture is not working as it's supposed to be. We are left at a standstill.
Aren't we caught because of the way the politics is structured in the country? If questions are asked about the curious circumstances, I'll put it that way, that then Minister Amrat resigned, the same time the Attorney General was, for all intents and purposes, demoted. And then Mr. Amrat gave the reason that he had wanted to go spend time with his family and quality of life with his family, which is a very valid reason, that anyone can give. Family is always paramount and important. And then next week we're hearing, after a minister's resignation, because we can't take that lightly, and he was also leader of government business in the Senate. So he didn't hold light portfolios, let me put it that way. And then now coming back in this new position, I mean, it just seems very curious to many people looking on. But if you ask questions and push about it, you are either seen as anti-government and pro-X or Y. And so we can't get past that phenomenon in Trinidad and Tobago that you can't seem to ask valid questions before without being tagged red or yellow or green or brown.
But
as a citizen.
But Paul, I think I understand where Professor Deosaran is coming from. He is saying these questions should be asked internally in the party structure, in the delegate system and so on. He is saying that is where those questions should be posed, as opposed to just the media doing it. And I don't disagree with him.
But not only the media, Professor, the general public has the right to ask these questions. Am I wrong?
Paul, you're quite correct. That's what I'm saying. I repeat what I have said. About 2 weeks ago, But of course, people don't take on these things. In fact, they don't even take me on. They may take on you because, you have a big voice.
I ain't think people take you on because we take you on.
But listen, we are dealing with the principles. It is coincidental that Rambarat's name came in the fore, but we are speaking about the principles of governance. I am saying our political architecture is distorted and it's subversive of democracy. For example, the principle is that you elect people to serve in parliament and you make them ministers to handle a budget of millions of dollars, taxpayers' money. If you have a bicameral parliament, you have the Senate, where you select people with experience in education, social work, law, and so on. Experience, prominent people, as the Constitution says, outstanding people in their particular fields. What do we have? We have a candidate who was put up for elections and he lost. He was made a minister. Next election, you put up the same candidate and he lost. You make him a minister and leader of the House. And with millions of taxpayers' dollars being handled by this minister. Now, that is not how the system is supposed to work. Because if in the democratic sense, you go for elections and the people didn't vote for you, you have a moral obligation. There you have to wait another time, but you cannot take
does
advantage.
Does that mean that you have no value though?
Yeah, but don't put you in parliament to handle people's millions of dollars.
So then what about all the people in the Senate? Nobody didn't vote for them?
No, but strange enough, what
but they
Professor
were chosen on criteria. The Constitution puts a criteria, outstanding persons in so on, so on, so on, so on, so on, so.
Yeah. But what
And you didn't
Professor
go for
Deosaran
election
is
and lost?
describing, Mr. Manning never did it, eh? It changed under Dr. Rowley. Mr. Manning never put a losing candidate into the cabinet. He never did it.
Well, listen, you see, these principles have to be revived because they are not just legal issues, they are moral issues, they are ethical issues. And a society cannot run only by law alone. They say the rule of law. But the rule of law could be advantageous to poor people and so on. That's another issue. But the ethics and the morality, public morality in this country have sunk. Let me tell you, when Mr. Pandey was prime minister, good fellow, nice fellow, I like him very much, and many people like him. He put up about 4 or 5 persons who lost elections to be in parliament, and even some of them ministers.
Yes.
And Mr. Robinson, as then president, objected. There was a standoff for about 2 weeks.
Yes, I remember.
And Mr. Robinson gave way because the Constitution doesn't allow him to have such an authority. And that is where this thing started.
Yes.
We cannot have an election on the premise that if you're elected, you're going to parliament and you have the Senate there. And then see somebody that the electorate rejected becoming a minister, especially in an important ministry where taxpayers' dollars are handled, and you need this person to connect to the rest of citizens. I don't know how the citizens will feel about the moral authority of this particular person. And I'm not speaking about persons here. Let me emphasize. I think this principle of this is taking advantage of the electorate. This should be revisited. And it shouldn't be encouraged because it violates the principle of fair and free elections.
Yeah.
And the outcome, the integrity of the outcomes.
I want to go back a bit to the connection between the crime situation we're seeing, because you've written about this extensively, the education system and the crime situation we're seeing in Trinidad and Tobago, our propensity for violence, clearly. And what are your concerns? Because we've had an education gap pre-pandemic, a significant education gap. You've written about it, I've researched about it. The inequity in the education system, where about 35% of the school population are underperforming significantly. And the connection to what we're seeing in terms of criminality. And now, added to that, the learning gap precipitated by the pandemic and what you see the projections are moving forward where that is concerned, if you think it's something that we should be looking at carefully.
Yes, Paul, that is a critical source for subsequent criminality. You're right. You see that gap you mentioned earlier on, the gap between the successful schools academically and those who are relatively not successful, that gap perpetrates criminality because the people who don't succeed relative to the others, and the others who succeed are celebrated in Hilton and so on every year. That demoralizes about 15,000 of the students. About 20,000 also write the exam. No, you can't have that every year. People who expect to be failures and become failures, because that is the self-fulfilling prophecy in these so-called schools that do not succeed. I have heard you making this point over and over, but to me, nobody takes this seriously. They have a task force now looking at it, but the thing is not only process, it is structurally so. You have to improve these government so-called these schools, many of them government schools, by looking at the teachers. You have to get the teachers on board. You cannot have a animosity between the union and the ministry, not in a matter like this. This is not just a matter of labor relations. This is a matter of life and death, occupationally speaking, for about 15, 16,000 of our young people. And when they fail, where do they go with such despondency after? When they drop out of the secondary school, where do they go with such despondency? Into the gangs, where they get respect, they get leadership, they get peer support, and they get income. This is an alternative for them, in their perspective. There's nothing to be guilty about. They continue to see this as a legitimate alternative. And we have written a lot about this. Let me show you something. You talk about this. See, this is something that talks about that same issue. This was developed with about 20 of our top experts in the country. I was the chairman of this. The vice chairman was Mr. Ken Gordon. This dealt with all the connections we make. It was called a National Action Plan Against Crime. Not only was the name important, but Paul, this was produced to the government formally to Mr. Pandey in 1995. And Mr. Pandey said he very welcomes this plan because it is the only thing now that they could use to help deal with the crime problem. Crime is the #1 problem in this country, and we are grateful for this support by the university because I was chairman. 1995, crime was our #1 problem. Look at the help that we tried to give them. Civic society, Kenneth Lala was there. We had the president of the Chamber of Commerce, and as I said, Ken Gordon was vice chairman. 20 of the most, and then before I go, look, this is a tool, you know this? 2017, this is a
but Prof.
we
Deosaran,
produced 600 pages report. Where are these things? We could talk, but there are other people who made such contribution. Why don't we build something incrementally, rather than, as I said, with Angela Barrett, Sean Luke, going around the circle as if something happened for the first time. Sorry.
Prof. Deosaran, good morning. You know, I'm hearing you and I've been listening to the conversation. I couldn't join in before. And a lot of it are conversations we've been having almost generationally in terms of the issues that are facing Trinidad and Tobago post-1962. A lot of it is talk and reports and people like yourselves contributing time and your expertise in providing guidance and policy documents to several governments. And still yet in 2022, we are still here. The same thing that was happening in 1995 where crime was a #1 issue, it is now still a #1 issue and we're in 2022. And so therefore, the country seems to be in a comatose state in terms of transformational change. And that transformational change and the seriousness with how we deal with dysfunctionality in the education system, dysfunctionality in the family structures, the issues of how the dysfunctionality in the TTPS, all of the dysfunctionalities that contribute to where we are today, how serious are we as a society in really fixing it? I don't think we're that serious. Because you just proved to us by holding up those reports that this sort of exercise in analysis and process and policy and examination of data has been going on before 1995. We're now in 2022 and we're still having this discussion.
And we'll have it next year. If another tragedy like Manny, that 2-year-old, happens unfortunately to die again. But you know, Michael Scott is a businessman. No one again, he writes a column. The last column he wrote, and I picked it up, he said we should have a funeral to bury the corpse of civil society because it looks as they are dumb and deaf to the very serious issues confronting this country, and they're not making their voices heard enough. Now, you may not agree with this because people still try. There are a lot of voices, you know. It is not a matter of speaking. It's a matter of who is listening and who is acting and who is responsible constitutionally to listen. I think it's section 52 or 54. Parliament and the executive are responsible for the public safety and peace and order of the country. Is that constitutional requirement properly fulfilled by those who have been fairly elected, or the whole parliament? And you are right. Whatever your frustrations might be, I'll tell you, next year we might come back again. I have been doing this for years, you know, as you say, donkey years. I don't like to refuse Mr. Khan. He asked me, I say, I'll come again. But I know in my mind, I have been saying this thing. It's like a poem to me. I could stay here and recite everything I have said 5 years ago, 10 years ago. In Parliament too, I was where Paul is sitting now. I moved motion on crime. I moved motion, successful motion on election financing. It was approved. I moved the motion on broadcasting parliamentary proceedings. It was approved. I did my work. the law tells me I should still stick around a little while.
So
And
what
I'm
does it
doing-
take? What does it take for Trinidad and Tobago to change? Because we were having this discussion in the first hour where we were talking about, and Paul referenced, their rock bottom situation, that Trinidad almost feels like it's at a rock bottom point with regard to crime. And I said, well, I think we've been here before. We have had several rock bottoms. So being at rock bottom does not seem to initiate the kind of transformation that is required in the society. So what does it take? Is it a constitutional reform? Is it a complete alternative to the two parties that we have been saddled with in one form or the other post 1962? Is that where the problem lies? Is the problem us? What is the problem that we can't transform a society of 1.4 million people?
I think the problem is civic leadership too, apart from political leadership. I don't want to sound ominous or an alarmist, but the kind of democracy that we have is based on what is called a social contract. That is, you elect people to serve you because you pay them through taxpayers' money. If they don't do the job, this contract requires the rest of society to take action. Now, what could that action be? Writing to the media, protest. Now, look what happened in Sri Lanka 2-3 days ago. The government collapsed because they were found, in the citizens' view, not doing the job properly. Cost of living rose, price of gas raised, and the people protest for weeks. And the government, the prime minister had to resign. That is where the social contract comes alive. I am not recommending that drastic action. I can't do it. I am not in a position to do so. But I'm just telling you in principle, citizens have a duty to be vigilant and sometimes leave their warm, cozy homes and do something outside to express a view of dissatisfaction. I don't know if we're doing that enough or we have done it enough, but the legal apparatus is such that a government could run legally, if not illegitimately. There's a big difference between a legitimate form of government and a legal form of government. We have too much of the legal form. We lack the moral authority, and we lack the legitimacy because of the complaints you're hearing with water, health, education, potholes, and nobody take it on. When we talk about roads and potholes and the lack of signs on our highways and byways,
Prof, I just
the minister, one more point. The minister said he appointed a committee to investigate the potholes. That is the biggest joke for this year. And the matter stops there, the headlines here, and the matter stops there.
I want to go back to the issue of crime and the police service. And I know you referenced earlier on the structural changes that need to take place in the TTPS. And you held up the manpower report before when a past commissioner came before the Joint Select Committee on National Security and told us, because I was a part of the committee, that he doesn't agree with a lot of what's in the manpower audit report. So there's a kind of dissonance, you understand, even at the hierarchy of the police service. What specifically, for people looking on, because you're talking about civil activism and people raising their national voices about change, what specifically should the public be clamoring for in the TTPS to hold them to account and make them more effective?
Yeah, police service regulations. And if you read it, there are systems to initiate disciplinary measures. Similarly, in the Constitution, Section 123, as amended. So there are systems in place for both the commissioner and the Police Service Commission to initiate disciplinary measures. Those measures have to be based on inquiry and tribunal and so on. Those things have not been functioning effectively. So it comes back to the question about responsibility and accountability. You can't have these rules on paper and let them remain as just corpse. That's one way to start. More precisely, Paul, one of the things that we recommended, and the people should really build some capital upon this issue, is the entry requirements to get in the police service. And to me, it is worse with SRPs, Special Reserve Police. When I checked around, to make sure, how does a SRP get appointed? They say the main thing is good character. I spoke to former police commissioners. I wouldn't call your names now. Good character, and you're physically fit, and the commissioner could likely appoint you. You might
Well,
have one or two
recently,
passes, but that will help.
SRP is appointed because of all kind of reasons recently.
Well, yeah, you
All
see,
kind of spurious reasons.
and if you notice, the number of them being held for one kind of offense or another. There's also a weakness in the police service itself in terms of entry requirements. We deliberated on that in the Manpower Audit Committee, the 8 of us. And each one of these 8 people were very qualified and experienced in their respective role with respect to public safety. And we decided to recommend that you raise the entry requirements and make it a more professional acceptance for entry. That is, they must have a diploma, at least. We're not going for bachelor's and a certificate. That will come later. But right now, the 5 passes not enough with the kind of legislation coming in. And they need to deal with the people, both in terms of law enforcement and preventing crime. You need a more highly trained officer, but you need one not only with paper certificates, you need one with the attitudes to serve and to comply with the rules and to be accountable. So you take this diploma before you enter the service. So it will mean you're committed to the profession.
But
we
Professor,
don't have that here.
Why would I go to university or even get 6 or 7 passes and run into the present contract of the police service?
Why you do that?
Why would someone do that, given what they're hearing about the corruption in the service, the ineffectiveness, the situation with an officer being shot in the back of his head recently, under very dubious circumstances? Why would I study in secondary school or do an undergrad and run into the TTPS now?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's a good question.
Unless something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Unless I have absolutely no other option. And you know, I hate to say it because I don't want to seem to be disparaging the TTPS because it's such an important institution in the country. But I think it's a valid question.
Yeah. I don't know that a better educated individual going into that service would help at this stage.
Well, it would help, but it's to try and incentivize them to get into the service.
Yeah.
Well, the only thing you could do with that is with regard to remuneration. Remuneration always helps.
Yeah, well, remuneration should come with the qualifications.
Yeah.
If you have a diploma as a first entry. But you know, what Paul is saying, it's valid. But you know, countries are not built on fear. Countries are not built on laziness. Countries, the developed countries of the world, have been built by a pioneering spirit. The courage to take on challenges, the courage to make changes, both socially and institutionally. All these countries that we boast about, who are at the top of the corruption-free index, they have a spirit of pioneership, adventurism, changing things, taking claim, taking back their freedom.
But you still have to inspire people to join an organization that has been sadly saddled with so much distrust and so much public contempt for many, many different reasons. And this despite honest, hardworking officers going out there and putting their lives at risk every day because of I didn't even say call it a few bad apples, because I'm really not sure it's a few bad apples alone, quite frankly. To go into that kind of environment, you really need to be incentivized significantly.
Well, if I were a little younger and I were to join in the police service, I would take my diploma and I will make a declaration that I am going there to change this institution for the better. Because what you implied here, Paul, is a chicken and egg situation. Which one comes first? If the police service is corrupt to some extent, and you rightly said there's a few bad apples, although not to show the numbers, but that can be changed by leadership. It happens in New York, it happens in Los Angeles, it happened in London. I visited most of these stations. and I understand how they enforce discipline, the level of corruption, but they use sting operations.
Yes,
They have
but
body
we're
cameras.
we see one or two officers, we saw two charged in relation to FUL the other day, but is it enough? Because we see is like chirp chirp as we see in Trinidad and Tobago, and we have no idea of the extent of the corruption. And if those charges, which are valid, I presume, are making a dent, that situation with PC what Jilks recently is frightening to me. It's frightening.
Frightening. I understand that, because if the forensic audit didn't, if the forensic inquiry didn't take place, you would have never known that gentleman was shot from the back behind, and that is why it's so dangerous. But let me tell you something. I am saying that we have certain structure systems in the police service regulations and the discretion that the commissioner has, and the Constitution provides for that too. But the system's not working. It's the institutions that not working. You might reform them and build on them, but what we have now is rather sufficient to apply. But the leadership is not working the system. When the commissioner, as you mentioned, come and tell you he doesn't agree with all of this. Why? We had a joint select committee meeting, twice headed by Fitzgerald Hines, on this report. And the committee agreed to certain things. If he or anybody else doesn't agree, tell us why. That is a secret. We should know why. Why doesn't they agree with a diploma first? Why then, if they put certain qualifications for a deputy commissioner and a commissioner about degrees and 15 years experience in law enforcement, why do we put criteria? We put criteria to help enhance the professionalism that the service requires and the capacity, both operationally and intellectually, to deal both with crime prevention, responding to citizens' complaints expeditiously, and all those attitudinal issues. We don't have that. We have complaints in domestic violence, particularly, and even in the recent cases, where a complaint was made at the police station.
I wish I could see what somebody in a significant office just said to me, but I can't. But I wish I could just say what somebody just said to me holding a significant office, because it makes me even more afraid. I know I won't quote you because I won't put you in that position, sir. But it makes me even more afraid based on what this person who would know it has just intonated to me. It's frightening. And Professor, I don't know if you can stay on just past our newscast. Can you stay on just past our newscast coming up next?
Yes, Paul. We have reached too far to turn back now.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, so let's get into our news brief. Thank you, Professor. And of course, our news brief, all powered by Champlain Auto Services.
This is your news bulletin from Power 102 Digital.
The neighbors of 2-year-old Kimani Francis, whose body was found yesterday in the Guapo River, have expressed outrage over the circumstances that preceded his death. Many question the presence of the boy's parents, who were at home when he disappeared, and also the role of the female neighbor who said she pursued and contacted the police when she saw the toddler wandering off. The neighbor has since come under heavy criticism for not doing more to recover Kimani, despite her claims that she attempted to follow the boy. The opposition support is being called for with respect to the Cannabis Control Bill 2020. It comes from Minister in the Office of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, Renuka Sagram-Singh Suklal. Minister Sagram-Singh Suklal made the appeal while contributing to the bill in the Senate on Tuesday afternoon. There has been condemnation of the recent acts of vandalism carried out at some places of worship. This position was expressed by President of the interreligious organization, Pundit Lloyd Mukram Serju. In April, the Pastoral Center at St. Francis RC Belmont was vandalized. 2 men have been held in connection with the incident, and there was also an attack on the Karapo Shiv Mandir. In Cuba, the family of Guillermo Farina says the Cuban dissident was arrested on his return to Cuba following an international tour during which he denounced the treatment of political prisoners in his homeland. Mr. Farina's mother said that the car they were traveling in was intercepted by state security agents. In 2010, the activist won the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought. The 60-year-old is a long-term campaigner for human rights. And protesters in Sri Lanka have burned down homes belonging to 38 politicians as the crisis-hit country plunged further into chaos, with the government ordering troops to shoot on sight. Police in the island nation said Tuesday that in addition to the destroyed homes, 75 others have been damaged as angry Sri Lankans continue to defy a nationwide curfew to protest against what they say is the government's mishandling of the country's worst economic crisis since 1948. Well, that was your 8 o'clock news update. Look out for news in full coming up at 12 noon.
Do you need to get work done on your vehicle? Look no further than the Auto Champions, Champlain Auto Services. From vehicle inspection to shutdown service, they do it all. Champlain Auto Services, great mechanics and technicians, exceptional customer service with accessories galore. Champlain Auto Services is your one-stop shop. They are your Auto Champions. You name it, they can fix it. Champlain Auto Services, Eastern Main Road, opposite Carib. Call 662-6545 and like us on Facebook. Champlain Auto Services. We do it all.
Up to date and credible. Power 102 Digital.
All right, 8:03, 30 seconds after the hour of 8 o'clock. Thank you so much, Champlain Auto Services, for powering an 8 o'clock news brief. You can look them up. They're on the Eastern Main Road, opposite Carib. Give them a call, 662-6545, and like them or follow on social. All right? Thank you so much, Champlain Auto Services. Of course, our guest, Professor Ramesh Deosaran. Thank you so much for sticking around after our news brief. Paul?
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Prof, for sticking around. We're going to open the phone lines also because we're getting requests for persons who have questions to Prof in regard to criminality and the way forward for Trinidad and Tobago. And yet, you know, as I said before, you know, it gives me no pleasure to talk about the police service in this way, but at the end of the day, you're right. The Constitution guarantees citizens the right to life and the protection of life and property. That is in our Constitution. So when that's not happening, there's a breach of the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago. And the entities that are given the responsibility to uphold law and order and to protect life and protect property are abdicating their duty in many respects. Look at the number of murders we've had in the last month or two. I mean, it's astounding. I mean, yes, there's the domestic conflict side of it, but we cannot pretend that that is the only component to the number of murders that we're seeing in the country. And the issue of gangs, what do you think it will take? Is it better laws we need, Professor, or better policing to deal with the gang situation?
But we have intelligence. The kind of apparatus I have heard about being present under control of the police service, with the defense force. And then you tell us a known gang leader was killed. When you say a known gang leader, that phrase befuddles me, because if he's a known gang leader, you would know, you have seen the legislation and anti-gang. The definition of a gang and the definition of a gang member is so broad enough that once you know, as police have reported, that he's a gang leader or he's a gang member, the detection rate should start.
But then they say that's intelligence and not evidence. The response is, we have intelligence that must be converted to evidence. Where's the evidence? Why can't we get the evidence?
Why can't you get the evidence? That is the police work. That is the police work. Do some sting operations, talk to other people, track it down. There are other ways to do it. But the way the gangs, you see, it's not only the gangs we have now. As you keep insisting all the time, is the production of the material that go into the gangs, the school system, the social work collapse, the institutional collapse in the children's homes. You know, so all along, as I said just now, We're facing a crisis of institutional collapse in this country all around. And you have these ministers now, just what I don't want to use the word parroting, but they're going around, cutting ribbon, making pronouncements, announcements, promises, and it keeps going around. The institutions, they're not holding anybody to account. If you head of an institution in this country, a state agency, and you can do whatever it is wrong, distorted, subversive of the institutional purpose. If you belong to the party, if you was a ranking member in the party, or you know somebody who is a high-ranking member of the party, they don't touch you as they should. That is why I say party politics in this country has degenerated. It has failed in its promise to serve democracy. It has become a system for patronage, favors, and sometimes corruption. And that's why I say you've got to start with the membership in the party. That's how I started this discussion. You can't see a party as a bridge towards self-serving profit, getting a job. The pioneering spirit that this country needs has been lost, and it is becoming diminished. Everybody wants to do something for personal gain, including being a member of a party. Nobody thinking about the country. I have heard this thing so many times.
What are the new parties coming out? What do you think of them and their potential?
Well, I don't know if you were playing one, I would think about joining. But
no, I'm talking about Gary Griffith as a new party, the National Transformation Alliance. Philip Alexander as the PP. The PDP has made some progress, significant progress in Tobago. What are these new parties in terms of giving people options, as some suggest, and not being held to the two monoliths as the only option?
Well, you're raising a fundamental question again. Would a new party change the country, change the society? I am still waiting to hear how this could be done. They are newly formed. I see some parties only have one member as the leader. I find all this very, very strange.
Which party is that, Professor?
Well, let's leave it. So I want to see when the scenario unfolds. Maybe we'll talk about it some other time. But you see, forming a party is the easiest thing to do. I could form one tomorrow, and I will get a good headline, and I'll fall back. And and I could give press releases left, right, and center. What you need is a serious party, like what Williams formed. Eric Williams formed a good party. He met near the beach with about 8 or 9 of them. They went through the manifesto, they looked at the vision. He had things at the back of his head, which he articulated in Woodford Square. But you form a party to become a serious party. The fact of the matter is people are laughing at these parties that have been formed. Maybe the party will have a last laugh. I wish them well. They are doing what they are supposed to do as a citizen. But it'll take more than what they're doing now in terms of challenging the status quo. I wish them well, but I'm telling you, you need a
Professor Deosaran, I want to remind you, a party with one man and about 9 family members. That man went on to form an alliance with the People's Partnership. He was the press secretary. Then he became the High Commissioner in London, and eventually he get a stint as Attorney General in this country. You know, he and 9 members launched that party under a tent by Mandela Park. You know, I will never. Gavin Nicholas is his name.
Oh, Gavin Nicholas. Yes.
He had a party. You know, it's a party that carried him where he reached. You know.
Oh, so we have precedent then.
Yes, there's precedent for people with one-man party now.
Yes. Well, the precedents are being followed, so we'll wait and see. Because he reached fire, he became Attorney General.
Yes.
Very good example.
Yeah.
So maybe that is the tactic. You form a party with a lot of noise, a little light, but then when the crunch comes, you shift into the major party, and you get something in return.
Which is clearly what these smaller parties are attempting to do, in my humble opinion. I think they know very well that that is the only way that they could remove the PNM. And strange enough, Denise Demin has a nice article. It's the letter of the day in today's Express. And I read it, and she basically is parroting the same thing, you know, that clearly that's the strategy now.
Strategy. That is not a manifesto. That is a strategy. Well, let us
Professor,
see.
We
They will
are, we
vote.
are live on YouTube and on Facebook, and I guess we could open up the lines also.
Professor, given what you're seeing now, what's your greatest fear for this country?
Pardon me, Paul?
Given what you're seeing now, what we are all seeing now and living, what's your greatest fear for Trinidad and Tobago? What's your greatest concern, I should say?
Well, the crime continues to eat away the moral fabric of this country. Moral in the sense that people are losing hope. They're sending their children abroad to study. And if they do send them abroad, they tell them don't come back. All those are very demoralizing features for a country that is rather newly independent. A country that is newly independent, as I said, you need a pioneering spirit. A lot of people have been saying from the president come down, put country before party. That is not working
That's just
for
words.
very self-serving reasons. It's party before country now, and everybody knows that. Why you think all these parties have been formed for?
Do you think that the suggestion or the comment that, well, we're going to be 60 years old just now, that's still relatively young, very young for our country, holds any water where all we're going through is concerned? Is it just growing pains or more than that?
More than what?
Is it just growing pains, or is it a deeper systemic issue in a country in crisis?
That's a good issue. That's a good way to look at it. Whether the darkest hours the one nearest the dawn, you know. Well, these things, they are not that simple, because the problems we face are becoming embedded in the structure and in the psychology of the people. And that to change will take a lot of work, including crime. You can't come with a crime plan to have solutions tomorrow or next week. Crime is deeply sociological because of parenting, education, all these structural socialization features create what we call crime. The building of attitudes, deviance, especially when deviance is reinforced by rewards like gang formation. So to deal with that, you need at least a 5-year plan to deal with crime in a specific way. The general question you ask is that, are we close to the light because the darkness is closest to the light? I don't think so, Paul. I think we have to do the work required. And we have become a lazy people in a sense of institutional reform. And you can't leave things as they are and hope that by magic we will come off of this abyss. We have to work at it. The media is doing a good work. If it weren't for the media in this country, with whatever their shortcomings, I really don't know what would have happened, you know. I really don't know what would have happened. We take it for granted, I know that, because the media has a job to do. They are constitutionally free and so on. But I must tell you, we are hanging with just because the media is present amongst us. If you have left this thing for the politicians alone and the Constitution alone, what do you say about Crapo? Crapo will smoke our pipe. So I'm not too strong on the view that, all right, we'll come out of it just now. We will experience the pains and we'll learn. We're not a learning society. That's what I said. When we produce this, we should have learned from this. When we produce this audit report, the 8 people who sweated day and night, 2 o'clock in the morning, we were working, you know, because the Prime Minister wanted it in a hurry. Hurry what? All these things create a demoralized society.
What has come out of it? Professor,
Nothing.
Yeah, that's the sad thing about it. We've been having these conversations for 30 years and we're just going around in circles, it seems.
It's tiresome.
Yeah. Professor, thank you for being with us this morning.
Well, you know, it's very sad to be talking about these things.
Yeah.
But I mean, the truth must prevail. You know, I mean, we know there are some good things happening. A lot of people, the business community is struggling. A lot of people doing some work, teachers, nurses. We know some police officers, I know them, they do well, but there are still issues to be dealt with. And we hope that everybody who have a position to serve well and help build this country, if not next year, but in the next couple of years, into a better form than we have now. Thank you, Paul. And thank you to your other speakers for sharing.
Thank you for being with us. We know you're quite learned in these areas, and we really appreciate your contribution and your continued work in Trinidad and Tobago.
All right. Thank you, Professor.
All right. Thank you, Professor Ramesh Deosaran, for being on the Power Breakfast Show. Thank you so much. All the best to you. Have a great one and be safe.
Yeah.
All right. All right. It is 17 minutes after the hour of 8 o'clock.
Recording stopped.
Break. Be right back. Got a Kiss Power choice coming up.
National Disaster Prevention and